She says her name is Goldie.
My name's Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
And I'm Tom Scholey.
Today we're going to be talking about Frank Miller's foray back into comics in the early 1990s with the serialized story Sin City, known to latecomers as The Hard Goodbye.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of like A New Hope got
Exactly.
appended to Star Wars.
Exactly. And I think one of the smartest things that Frank Miller did, and Mignola did it as well, is they didn't just have a run-on series. Like, they were kind of like forerunners of the idea of, like, we're in this issue 1 boom. It might be death to have issue 30 of something, so we'll just have these, like, small miniseries. But we started off with this serialized story that was in Dark Horse Presents. You read it that way, am I right, Jim?
Not totally. I had a couple of chapters from that. It was a little bit rich for my blood to buy Dark Horse Presents. I bought a couple issues because at the time, Frank Miller was my favorite cartoonist. So I bought a couple issues of Dark Horse Presents. They were like $2 indie book, and you're getting maybe 8 pages in some of those. So it was a little bit rich for my blood, and I also didn't have access to a comic book shop. So I bought a couple issues, loved it, but then like the big one was this first collection. And that collection was something that I had to use my local comic book shop for, and was like, find this book, because he would go to conventions and places that I didn't have access to, and I desperately wanted this. Like, I needed to read the whole thing, and it took a while. It took probably 6 months after the book came out before he came back from some show or other with a copy. I would call him like every Monday morning, like, did you find a copy yet? So I read it early on. I read it in 1992 whenever it came out, and this was the book for me. Like, this was my favorite artist at the time. He had been away from comics, as you say, Ed, for like 4 years. Comes back, he's writing several things, and he's finally drawing something with Sin City. And it was the art, was a big chunk of what I was responding to with him. I like his writing, but I wanted to see the artwork. And I loved the art in Sin City. It blew my mind. You mentioned, he was kind of writing these collections or standalone stories, miniseries, and I would view it that way. One of my notes is this trade paperback was a big deal. It was hard to find Dark Horse Presents. I'm sure many people read and enjoyed it in that form. But that is not a high-selling book. That wasn't a book at every comic shop. And so I think the collection is when it really hits, which would have been before trade paperbacks were like the standard thing. And that's something I think Mignola, all those guys were really doing, was writing like standalone stories, and then the miniseries was the way to send them out there to comic shops. But it was early trade paperback model of like, this is a graphic novel. Yeah. This is meant to be read in one piece.
Mm-hmm. A couple interesting points regarding his connection with Dark Horse and the construction of the original Sin City before we even get into the body of the comic. He is away from comics. He's in Hollywood. He's doing screenwriting, a bunch of failed scripts that didn't see the light of day, and what we did see was RoboCop 2 and 3, of which he wasn't that happy with.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And he becomes friends with Jeff Darrow while he's out there in LA, and I believe it was by way of Jeff Darrow's connection with Mike Richardson and the Dark Horse people, just in friendly terms. I don't think that Jeff did any work for them, or maybe he did something in like Chevelle Noir or something like that. But he inspired the conversation between Frank Miller and Mike Richardson. Mike Richardson brings him up to Portland, and for the first time ever in Frank Miller's illustrious career, Mike Richardson opens up the books and is like, this is what it costs us to make a book. This is our typical royalty that we give. This is the profit that we make on it after we cut distribution and freight and all sorts of stuff. And we are willing to take less of a percentage if that means we can have this book and have you participate in this. And Frank Miller said something that is actually very wise and something that I've experienced in my day. He declined that generous offer, said, let's keep it sort of the same base rate as everybody else. One, I have an ego and I'm pretty sure I'm going to sell, but I want you to have incentive to sell the thing. In my experience, I've been in situations where if I got publisher, TV studio, producers to just like start spending lots of money on the thing, it makes them more invested to sell the material.
It's the reason. It's a good reason to chase a big advance. because then they're on the
They
hook.
need to recoup it.
Right.
Right. So that was like one piece of the puzzle. What got him over there. Now with the construction of the story, one of the things that's revealed in the great whatever Dark Horse calls a gallery edition, I believe is a Dark Horse version of the artist edition, draws these pages twice up. You know, he describes it as drawing with my whole hand instead of my wrist. And if you ever see interviews with him in his Hell's Kitchen studio, you do see when he's drawing something, it's like a swordsman.
Yeah, speaking of the art, I feel like this is the European influence in his art. You know, like we saw kind of the Will Eisner stuff in Daredevil. We saw the Japanese influence in Ronin. And I feel like at this point, you're really seeing some European artists in that artwork.
I think Jose Munoz would have been one of the ones that were cited back and circulated. You know, Giffen was way into him, and so, but just these like stark black and whites.
Hugo Pratt's another that I think of.
I think that's clear. Like I think that is apparent in the artwork. But the last thing that we talked about with Frank Miller was Dark Knight Returns, 16 panels a page, and with this first Sin City story, you're lucky if you get 7 panels per page, and those are very, very rare. So the line quality is very European, but the pacing is very Japanese to me. Very decompressed manga type storytelling flow. Difference being, well, one, the use of captions. You don't see that in manga very often, and that helps like kind of add gravity and some length to the story. You know, makes it feel a little bit longer than it probably really is. You know, it gives you much more rich detail, but 2-panel pages, 3-panel pages for the most part, this thing can zip right by.
He does a lot of fascinating stuff in the storytelling, because there are a lot of one-panel pages. And I'm sure some of that, they were title cards and things for a serialized chapter story. But he does a lot with those single-page images, sometimes 2 or 3 in a row, really, I guess, playing with pacing.
Yeah,
and
he's really into
manipulating
controlling the pace, and that's his strategy, is a lot of panels, little panels, like all kinds of different, changing it up.
Let me ask you this, Jimmy, because you do have the Dark Horse Presents issues. Did you compare and contrast? Because I know for the other miniseries, like I had those in issues, and then I had the trade as well. It's always nice to have the cozy little book edition to read in bed or whatever. And he adds splash pages to the big books. Did you make note of if that's the case in the trade paperback? Because I bet you it is.
Nothing stood out to me in that regard, and I was thinking about, like, is he changing anything, drawings, text, anything? And nothing stood out to me, but a lot of the covers that he did are placed, at least in this edition, in this first printing, and they're arranged in weird ways. Like, they might follow a story instead of preceding it. So he's definitely, I think, continuing to manipulate the kind of the layout, the composition of the story as a whole. But I did not notice if there's, a splash page here or there, besides, like I said, a couple of the covers being arranged in a way that it's not standard. Like each chapter is not arranged the same way.
In the other miniseries too, like it would be also a sales mechanism whenever they would start to promote the trade paperback and say there are 16 fresh Frank Miller pages, and I just don't know if that was the case with this. I do know that there was one piece of promo imagery, or maybe it was like a piece of Dark Horse Presents artwork or something, where it's Marv versus a bunch of nuns. Like where did that hit the cutting room floor? Because I want to read that part of the comic.
Yeah, that's that's on the cover of one of the Dark Horse Presents,
Right.
and then in my edition, it's just like extra art. And to me, it's like similar to Ronin. There were like, he kind of had this idea of what his story was going to be before he started, and then it went in different directions. And probably a big element, since there's that big like Catholic element to the story, was probably going to be like him having to fight a room full of nuns before he gets to wherever he's going.
Maybe he was working on Electra Lives Again, and then like was confused on a couple of things. It's all blurring together for him. He needs solicitation art.
He's done a bunch of Sin City series, and he still never got to one of the characters versus a nun yet. So I don't know if he's saving that for like the final one.
We don't need to go through the story plot by plot, but I do think it's worth noting how noir it is and how much crime fiction it is, because that did not exist much in American comics. That was one of those genres that really popped up after Sin City, and as comics started to branch out, American comics started to branch out in the late 90s and be more than just superhero comics. Crime became like the secondary genre that became very popular, but it did not exist. Like this book really made that viable, put it on the map, And one of the revolutionary pieces of this book was like, it wasn't just indie comics, it wasn't just black and white comics, it was like basically a whole nother genre that really had not had much success in comics for decades.
Yeah, because like the Comics Code had deleted it from existence as even an option, and then it just was gone, and like now we're at a point where you don't have to put something out through the Comics Code, so there was room for it to come back. It's just Frank was the guy who's like, okay, let's do this.
And obviously, everyone knows his affinity for the crime genre. It's cited often as an influence on his early work on Daredevil. Like that was something he brought to superhero comics. So that's the other piece of this. It feels like he got to do whatever he wanted. This is the result.
And he adds to the noir kind of canon in a lot of ways, because he is visual as well as literary. So you read the words, and he often admits that the purple prose of a Mickey Spillane is kind of like what he's into a lot. But then he adds like purple art or something, I guess you would call it. And here are some of the things that I'm talking about. I'm talking about when Goldie's sister Wendy is mashing him with the car. Like what you're seeing behind those tires is like fire. You know what I'm saying? It's not even smoke.
It's great.
And when Lucille, Marv's parole officer, is getting bucked down by those bad guys, it's perfect circle holes with like inner shadow, like perfect circle. Like you get shot, that doesn't happen. It's cartoon fucking bullet holes, but it totally works in this kind of like noir chiaroscuro.
You could extend that to backgrounds too. Like he frequently is drawing bricks, and it's perfect patterns. It's just a great visual motif that is not, if you were photographing a brick wall in an alley, it would not look that neat and crisp. But in here, it works perfectly. It sets a tone. It's easy to read.
The whole look of this thing, like I'm really interested in art that has a physiological effect on the reader, and this is an example of that. Like that stark black and white, it kind of sears your eyes a little bit, and it kind of has it like your body starts reacting to it, and he really hit on something there, and he just kind of doubles down on it as it goes on too, where you're seeing like after image, like if you look away from a Sin City page, like blink your eyes, you can see what you're just looking at projected on the wall.
He's a devotee of the great Will Eisner. And one of the things that Eisner would always talk about is kind of like a theatrical, like stage presentation, and it could be as much as a lamp post and a guy standing there. We see a lot of examples of that in here, where you or I would have some sort of personal insecurity and need to put in, every bottle of liquor behind the bar, or whatever, to like sell the idea 1,000 pinball machines in that bar, rolling out perspectives and all that. When they're in that shady bar, and Nancy's up there dancing, there's a couple of round tables, a guy like in his own vomit, maybe a couple, like there's no hint of any real major background. It's all black, a couple of tables, a couple of drunk people, a little bit of vomit, a bar back, a bartender, and that's all you need. You know exactly where you are, and you don't have to have any more imagery other than that to sell the setting. And there are many examples of that in here.
And as something that we're revisiting, that we've read before and we're reading again, there's moments where it's like, I thought he had drawn this, and this, and then you revisit and you realize, oh, none of that's there. It's all just like you're filling in the gaps in those inky darkness areas.
Yeah, interesting to note that minimalism at the time period. This is 91, 92. This is the rise of Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane and that like ultra rendering style, detail. And it really is like as far the other direction probably as you can push it in a lot of instances.
And his approach is like Toth's process, because he would you look at these artist editions and stuff, you see that he did a ton of drawing. It's not like he just put in these areas of black. He would draw it, and it would almost look like an old issue of Daredevil or something, and then he has this like subtraction method where he's eliminating detail, blacking in things that he did meticulous drawing within. So it is, he's still doing a ton of drawing.
A ton of mileage out of the black and white. I think of like the rain sequences. Like there are sequences where he's clearly drawing with some kind of white media, and it feels like he as he's working in black and white, it's like, what can you do with this? You know, he uses negative space. He does things where one page is almost all white facing a page that's almost all black. It's really kind of magical from an art point of view, because it looks like a guy. I was used to color comics.
Yeah.
You know, I was aware of black and white comics, but I was used to color comics. So like, to see a guy who I consider to be a master at color comics to go to black and white, it's on display, that same process of like, let's explore this black and white stuff fully. Like, what can we do with this? And it's really kind of a tour de force of that, you know, almost opening the door of like, hey, black and white doesn't mean cheap, or, you know, we don't have a choice to do color. It's like, this is a decision, and watch what you can do with it.
Yeah, and it was you don't miss the color at all. Like, the lack of color is a strength. And like, those kind of, you know, art that has a physiological effect on you, usually it's color. Like, color is how you know, sort of manipulate emotion. So you know, to do it in black and white, just it was a breakthrough. Like, and he, I'm sure, acknowledged it as a breakthrough, and this sort of became the mode that he worked in for the rest of his career, with little, you know, modifications here and there. But he basically, once he hit, you saw a lot of experimentation leading up to this, but once he hit on this, he's like, okay, this is it. This is where I'm going to live now. Is this type of visual.
The beauty of this first Sin City story, though, is like, when it comes to the art, is we are watching him kind of like learn as he goes in a lot of ways. Like, the earlier parts of the story do not match necessarily the aesthetic as it moves later on, and there are even he's trying to figure out how to communicate with this like more limited set of tools, and it would be really dumb to just do this and have this conversation and just give unanimous praise, because there might be a couple of things where I bet if he had it to do over again, he would have figured some stuff out. One of the things that I was thinking about was the sequence where he drives the police car off the pier and he's swimming. It's so still and weird, like that. When I first read it, I was like, what is happening here? And it's like, oh, he's underwater. It's when he comes across like the one manhole where he crawls out of it, where like you feel the flow of the water, and it's like, oh, he's underwater here. And there are other stories. I think like there's a Dwight thing where he's underwater, and that was like a little weird to me too.
Well, I mean, underwater, like, that's a Miller motif. He had it in Daredevil and stuff, and it's all like a lot of artists do that, especially like artists in Miller's age range. And I think it's like Tarzan. I think they're trying to do Tarzan wrestling and alligator. Like, how many times in an underwater sequence in a Miller comic or another comic does the guy end up wrestling an alligator, you know, or an alligator swims by? But yeah, like, I mean, I always liked Miller's underwater scenes, and just like, you know, this like quiet, you know, this like, there's all this chaos going on, and then all of a sudden we have this like quiet moment. He got to revisit over and over again with these, you know, Sin City series, similar motifs and scenes. So you could probably, if you looked at them in order, you could see where he's like, oh, maybe I could do this instead. Yeah. You know, like see how his different how his water scenes in whatever that final one was, with like the guy with like the long hair, Hell and Back. Like, what's the water like if there is water, you know, and sort of see how he got there. I know there's a shot in here where you see the windmill, and the windmill's black, and then there's like a white line around it, and then black, and it's like, he never drew the windmill like that ever again. The windmill from then on is either a black windmill against a white background, or a white windmill against a black background, but none of this, like, you know, white line around it. I think
he is experimenting, as you say, Ed,
totally.
Because there's a quality that he has where sometimes he's using a line around things, and sometimes he's not. And I think there are points in the book where he goes too far in that experimentation, like you said, and it's not as effective, it's not as attractive. You know, it's almost like, okay, that's further than I want to push it with just the black and white, or just the heavy blacks. Yeah, so you see that, and then the other piece of evolution, you know, you mentioned, Ed, that it progresses through the story, is Marv's character. He's very human in the beginning, and not too far into it, it's the cartoon version of Marv. You know, like, it's almost like he figures out, not just in the drawing, but also in the caricature, in the expression, how far he can go. Yeah. And that, I think, he actually does push into very effective territory.
I do as well. He describes Marv as a dope. Like, he's very good at killing people, but he's not good at anything else. And he said that sort of in relation to defending Marv as against like sort of like misogynistic banter or criticism. And he's like, no, he just doesn't know how to treat anybody right. In fact, when he gets mauled, mangled, and shot, what does he do? He puts Band-Aids on it. He's a dope.
Yeah, one of the iconic visual motifs of the Sin City.
Yeah, these sort of like Tetris Band-Aids that look so cool. Yeah, he's got like the profile the mole man. He's got like the mole man's face, and then his mom even more so has like the mole man.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, her shadow, like they're definitely
related. His mom's great, and like Will Eisner called the Sin City characters psychopaths, and Marv's a psychopath, like him or not, he's a psychopath, and and Will Eisner would refer to Marv as Marvin. He'd always call him Marvin. But there's like that scene where Marv goes to his old childhood home and his mom's there and stuff, and they have like a little moment together, and it's kind of like Joe Pesci when he goes to his mom's house, and like his mom almost kind of looks like Martin Scorsese's mom, who played Joe Pesci's mom. But like I feel like that's the most Eisner-esque moment because it's got a little bit of sugar, like it's a little bit of a sweet moment, and so that's probably like the one moment that Will Eisner like took with him. So like his mom calls him Marvin. So probably that's the only part of Sin City that Will Eisner like had any affinity for whatsoever.
It was when we went to go see Art Spiegelman talk here in Pittsburgh when I think his 9/11 book came out or something years ago. It was exactly around the same time when the Sin City movie came out, and some goofball in the crowd during the Q&A asked if Spiegelman went to go see Sin City and what he thought about it. Not for ironic reasons, but like literally like as a legitimate comics fan, like, yeah, man, right. You like comics, what do you think of Sin City? And Spiegelman's like, too many castrations for my taste. And there's at least one in this story.
Yeah, let's talk about that one. I have a few sequences that I've flagged, scenes that I really like, and I think the castration scene you're talking about, Ed, is two hitmen come up to Marv in the bar, walk him into the alley. His friend in the bar turns the music up so Marv can do whatever he wants without worrying, and it's great. There's an awesome line of the Marv monologuing or his narrative thought of, the great thing with hitmen is you can do anything you want to them and not feel bad. And so he smashes one guy's head against the wall and I guess takes him out. He might shoot him. And then the other guy has a coat he wants. So first he takes the coat off and then he shoots him in the stomach. And putting on the coat's great. And he's like, all right, now give me some answers. And the guy's like, please don't kill me. He's like, you're already dead. He shot him in the stomach like he's bleeding through.
He has this massive hole that comes out the back. He shoots him.
And so he's like, we can, I can make this really bad or I can end it quick. And the guy's kind of sputtering around and that's the castration. Then he shoots him in the groin. And you realize like, it's brutal, man. It's like, there's no hint at all that this guy's going to live through this. Like, he shoots him before they even start the interrogation torture scene.
And that's kind of like a thesis statement to this series, is that hitmen are great because he can do anything without moral recourse, and that's kind of what this story is about. Like, this is what it taps into, is like, we want to watch, there's a part of us that wants to watch people doing horrible, god-awful things, and the way we can excuse it is by having some sort of like moral reason for so like revenge. That's the whole revenge genre. We want to see a guy shooting people and stabbing people and whatever. But as long as he's got like an excuse that we can kind of swallow, then we're along for the ride,
Yeah, Marv is not a likable character. Like, you would definitely not want to be friends with Marv. You wouldn't want to hang out with him. I don't think you'd want to be in the same bar with him.
I disagree because I wouldn't mind just having some heavies that I could
definitely a heavy
that I could talk into. Like I would be Dwight. Like, I would be like, hey Marv, man, come with me, man. Like, watch my back, and knowing that he will.
Yeah, I feel like these are exactly the kind of people like human beings are sort of attracted to. Like, whether it's good or not, that it's like he's bigger, he's larger than life, he's colorful, he's got all these like zingers and one-liners. Like taking a step back and using your intellect or whatever. It's like, yes, avoid this guy at all costs. But I feel like a real life Marv would have a lot of friends and be surrounded by, like, you wouldn't want to get too close, but like there is an appeal, like there is this sort of like he could lead a cult.
It's like a Sammy the Bull kind of character. Like scary, he'll do bad things, but if you guys are on the same side, like you could probably, at least for a time, sleep well at night. Just don't cross him.
That's the appeal. I read this. I was 18 when I read this story, and when I read this story, I was so on board. Like, I was on board 100%, and I thought it was like the badass thing ever. And then like 2 years later, I was 20, and I read it again, and I'm like, oh, this is a parody. this is hilarious. Like, it's sort of like just that age of like you're a teenager and you can kind of get on board with this stuff, and then you're just a little bit older into adulthood. It's like, oh, like.
The second movie came out whenever Hip Hop Family Tree 1 came out, and I was doing signings. It was like the same weekend or whatever. So Sin City was in the air a little bit, and it was the talk at the comic shops when I would do these signings. Did one here at Copacetic, and I may have even have been going to go see that movie like after the signing or something. And it came up in conversation, and somebody actually was like, yeah, you know what, man, like I heard that like the Sin City movies, like those are movies for like those guys who like to wear fedoras. And I'm like, what's your point? You know what I mean? Like, I was sort of dismissing it in the same way as when the NWA movie came out and people were crying about the misogyny in that. I'm like, and?
I was going to ask what the subgenre of the fedora subgenre is. What else is on that list?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are
Very
like
specific.
Well, that was a meme at that time. Like the dudes who would wear that stuff would call girls toots and shit like that.
There's definitely that sense of like a retro, celebration, from the cars to the way women are treated. Yeah. Gun violence, like all of it's in there. The glorification of coats, like it all feels like it's this throwback, almost like Chris Ware might be throwing back to the 20s or something. This is a throwback to the 40s or something. And like there's a very specific era there.
I feel like there's that switch because Miller's reacting against like sort of hippy dippy, psychedelic, free love kind of stuff. Like, and as we learn more about Miller as the years go on, it's like, yeah, he wanted no part of that. That was like his older, like that was a little bit older than him, and he thought those guys were a joke, and he wants to get back to something older. And it's kind of like you see that, like Mad Men, the popularity of Mad Men for a while was kind of that too. You're wearing a suit and you're drinking martinis.
I'm sure this is rooted in that first wave of like pulp noir crime fiction, of that era, that 50s era. Tom, I was curious whenever you mentioned, this is a parody or whatever. Do you really think, like I don't get the sense of that. I don't think that Miller thought that way, especially at this time. Like, this feels to me like a sincere effort to tell this.
We'll never know the answer.
I guess not.
Because to know the answer, you got to be inside Miller's head. And I think, yeah, and he's enough of a showman that he can play it both ways, like a Stan Lee or a P.T. Barnum or whatever. Like, if you want to take it serious, you can take it serious. But some of this stuff is so funny. Like when Marv's being executed at the end, and he's like, "That's the best you got, you pussies," or whatever. Like you got to laugh out loud at it. And it is so over the top that whether it's intended as parody or not, it's parody. It's
There's a lot of little stuff like that. The way that he's able to like climb in between like the cement parts of brick walls. When he's catching a beating from those ladies, man, with the gun, and he's like mansplaining how you should pistol whip a person.
Right, and that whole sequence of the beatdown is like, it's a joke because they beat him up, and then at the very end he stands up and he's like, okay, yeah, I let you guys do that because I knew you were just gonna do a bunch of bitching and whatever, and like now like, you had to get that out of your system, and now let's get down to business. Like it's hilarious. It's at the very least it's gonzo, and if you're making something that's gonzo, people are going to take it as tongue-in-cheek.
And it does. This story in particular does kind of go that direction too, of being more realistic in the beginning, and then it probably is things he's discovering of like, I can make him look like a cartoon character. I can go over the top with this kind of tough guy acts and dialogue and stuff. So yeah, it may really be that.
And you see the escalation even within the series, like the series of Sin City graphic novels.
I think that definitely happens. And that was something I became less interested as the series went on. But for this book, that was something I kept thinking about in the reread, is like, how sincere is this? Because it feels like at some point it does become ironic and almost a parody of itself.
We are complicated creatures, the human organism, and there's a part of Frank Miller who would live and die by where this is dead serious to him, and there's a part of his psyche who understands that everything's a joke.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think as a storyteller that makes a lot of sense, because you are trying to put out entertainment. Thinking of wrestling as our point of reference, you see it all the time, as like wrestling goes between that very serious, we're going to hurt each other, to totally playing it up and doing humor and things.
Speaking of wrestling, which wrestler would you say Marv is most akin to?
Not a great
Race,
sense of humor.
yeah, Harley Race comes to mind.
Race is a good
but
one.
he's too smart.
Yeah.
See, I was thinking you were going to mention Bruno Sammartino.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because some of that there were a couple. There's a couple
Just
matches.
visually.
Yeah, there's a couple matches up on YouTube, and just the smeary cathode ray tube, the shitty old
Yes.
video quality. When you catch him in the side view, aesthetically,
sure.
It's totally Marv. Like that forehead is connected to the bridge.
Big chin.
And
Yeah.
it's like, and those images are like pure black and white.
Yes.
Like it's so burnt out, and it's like, man, like is this the first adaptation of Sin City? You know.
Now this was serialized in smaller units than the other miniseries, and I could tell where the first chapter ends, but it seems like as the story went on, Frank got more and more pages to play with. Am I right or am I not?
It varies. There are some issues where it's like double or triple length.
So in 8 pages, I believe, is like the first chapter. So he has to like move that inciting incident up a whole lot. In movies now, they begin with the gunshot. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, but it wasn't that way back in the early 90s.
Right.
That was a very rare thing. And the setup to this thing, knowing that he's only using small amount of pages, panels per page, 8-page count for that first thing, it is a perfect way to launch you into this world, man.
Yeah.
Guy meets girl, guy and girl do their thing, he goes to sleep, wakes up, she's dead, and he hears the fucking sirens blaring. That comes from noir, no doubt, but it would take you 5 chapters to get there in a Chandler book or a Spillane book or something like that, man. So he said that like Dark Knight Returns was an exercise in like reduction, like having the 16-panel grid. He could take things out, he could add things willy-nilly as he wanted to. And if you take a look in those artist editions, there are some pages where there might be 16 fresh panels stitched in to the thing. This one was all prep up front, and it was just, in terms of story and art, an exercise in reduction. So he was just breaking this thing down as spare as he could. It was supposed to be 45 pages. It was supposed to be maybe 5 parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The structure, like the structure is dictated by that format, but it's like what a great, what serendipitous thing, and him using it properly, because each chapter, it is like its own thing. Like there's the rain chapter where he's just walking around in the rain. There, and it's such a great. It's just a yarn. It's like you're just watching this thing unspool, and each fresh twist is
reminds me of like a serial. Like Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark would reference like the serial nature of like 3-minute clips or whatever. This felt that way to me, where it's like you get a lot of action in that one installment, and then it's the next installment, the next scene, then the next real piece of story emerges.
And it still like reads as a really well integrated whole.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, the final chapter it's told way differently than the rest of the story. It's very kind of abrupt. It's almost like that final chapter is like an epilogue of sorts, even though it's really the end, because up till that moment, you read 120 pages or something of like this moment-to-moment thing, Marv running around doing stuff. Then when you get to that final chapter, it's like weeks, days, and maybe months between panels. And it's so abrupt that it makes me feel like he just wants to get this one done or something. Like let's get out of this and then get busy on the next or something.
Could be part of the serialized nature. Often stories will be very good in parts, but not quite land, or be missing some piece that doesn't fit as well, and that could be that ending.
And there's a lot of very famous authors, man, who talk about like the way novels work just in general, and the common thought between most of these guys is like nobody has finished like the ending of most novels. I could tell that the author is just trying to get out of it.
Works great works are abandoned, not finished.
Yeah, sure.
Like the ending of it, like it works for me. Like the ending, like and that episodic nature, because the big culminating conflict is like him with Kevin, the guy who's like modeled after Mike Mignola,
Right,
but
yeah.
physically, not in any other way.
Well, we don't know that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, what did Frank Miller think of Mike Mignola at that time?
You know what? I'm glad you said that, because we do these Wizard episodes, and we recently just got into like the Legend imprint, and Frank Miller states, like, it's his quote when describing Legend, because the idea of like Legend Comics was that it was going to be like a roving imprint. Like, if you decided to do a book for Image, you could have the Legend logo on it. But he specifically says, like, it's my job, Frank Miller, it's my job if Mike Mignola wants to go off and do some sort of like hedonistic porn comic. like I'm not allowed, like, he's not allowed to put the Legend logo on that.
Yeah.
Cutting promos, man.
Yeah, so like, since that was like the thing that everything was culminating towards, the conflict, like the fight with Rourke, with St. Patrick, Patrick Rourke, like, just didn't have that build. Like, it's necessary. He's the like
The final
head guy.
boss.
Yeah, he's the little worm from the Captain Marvel, like that
Right.
crawls in animals' ears. Like, he's the guy. He's got to go after. And what a great reveal too. Like, he's built up as this like godlike figure. Like, he's like Darkseid or something. He's like Marv's standing at the base of the statue of St. Patrick, and he's like the god of Sin City or whatever. And he's like, shooting at this giant statue. And then he meets him, and he's like a troll or something. Like, he's like sort of three feet tall. It looks like he doesn't have like all the bones, and like, I mean, it's a soundless medium, but you kind of picture her talking like this, and just this great reveal. And of course, there wasn't going to be some slam bang, like he wasn't going to like pull out a gun, start shooting at, and like do a bunch of barrel rolls. Of course, it was just going to be like a slaughter. Like, to me, the climate, like the ending, like, I haven't seen it like a better ending to a comic than like him at the in the electric chair, and say, can we just get on with this? Enough already. And and then you get like a drawing of a skeleton, beautiful, and then it's like, it's not enough. Like, he's so fucking tough. Like, that was the point of reading it, way back when I was 20, where it's like, this can't be serious. He's like, is that the best you got? Like, great, perfect for the character, perfect for the series, perfect for the author, perfect for the medium. It's just this great, bow to tie up on a story.
You might have turned me around on that ending a little bit there, Tom. It's a good argument for it, I think.
Just even him getting captured by the cops in that moment is fun, because he's like pulverizing that little Rourke guy, and here's the sirens, here's people coming, and just doesn't care.
Yeah.
He just keeps beating the crap out
And this
of
is the
him.
revenge that he wants. Like, he predicts all of this from the very beginning. He's like, I'm going to get revenge. I'm going to probably die. And it's going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of squealing and screaming. And he didn't get that from Kevin. Kevin was a stoic. He didn't bat an eyelash. But this Rourke is giving him, and this is the guy pulling the strings. So, he's getting that satisfaction that he wanted, the catharsis of revenge cinema, revenge comics, revenge whatever.
Another noir stroke is the concept of the dead ringer, the twin.
The double, yeah.
And that's Wendy Goldie, but this can harken back to the EC Comics of a Johnny Craig, who did at least 2 or 3 dead ringer stories in crime suspense stories. So I feel like there's a little nod to him with those.
It works really well in a visual medium, film or comics. That's a great thing to bring into the visuals.
And he cited Johnny Craig as an influence. I mean, another cited influence is Jack Kirby. And like, you see Jack Kirby all through it. There's panels where I could point to where it's like Marv busting through a wall, like Orion busting through a wall in like issue 3 of New Gods, and then Marv's whole look is like a Hulk, the aforementioned Mole Man face and stuff. And then there's when he's in the sewer, like there was like a Johnny Craig story of like a guy like in the sewer where as the water is rising and stuff. But also, like, I see the Thing in the sewer in Fantastic Four #1. Like, that's a Kirby sewer. And then the one that really stands out is that scene where they're locked up in that in that cell at the farm, and he keeps throwing himself at the wall with like no shirt on and just pants. That's Fantastic Four #2. The Thing, no shirt, but pants, just bashing himself into this like wall over and over, busting through it. Like it's like, and maybe this stuff's just part of Miller's DNA as like a lifelong comics fan. There's like comics references all through it.
I'm glad you mentioned the farm and when they're locked up in the basement. That was one of the issues I bought as a kid. It's actually a double or triple sized installment, and it blew my mind. Like that was the first Sin City I ever saw, and it's beautiful. It's shot like the opening sequence is through the stairs, in the basement, and it's this great perspective drawing, great shadows, like everything. Like I was looking at it as a kid, just like, how is it even possible that someone can draw this? And that whole half of that chapter is Marv ramming against the door, and it's every other panel is the clunk, clunk, clunk. And he shows it through several pages and through several versions of breakdowns. So like there are full page panel of him hitting. It starts outside, and you get the clunk, and then a panel without it, and the clunk, and then the panels without is him bouncing off the door. Then we're inside the room, and we're seeing like horizontal panels. Hit the wall, bounce back. Hit the wall, bounce back. Then we're seeing it in smaller panels, and it's all like one, back and forth.
The Watchmen tick-tock,
tick-tock. Yeah, it's an incredible sequence. Visually, the movements left to right, it's like it's this way's the door, this is him bouncing off. This way the door, him bouncing off. It was just such an amazing like tour de force of comics and storytelling for me. That one seared into my brain. Like I still think about that sequence.
That chapter is a breakthrough, and you can kind of see all the elements that Miller's working with kind of gel right in that moment.
Yeah, that's an incredible sequence. It's like I said, I've written down like several outstanding sequences, and that's one of them on my list, and possibly the top one on my list.
And like there's a part where like you start out like zoomed in, and you just see like a rose, and then the camera zooms out, and you see like and you're like, what am I looking at? And then it zooms out, and you're still like, what is that? And then
there are several of those moments too throughout the story of these just great scenes, set pieces almost.
Recently, Miller's been teasing the idea of doing like a new Sin City miniseries, and that it would take place, it would be like a Western tale sort of at the beginning of Basin City's creation. And a lot of that groundwork, it would be expanding off of things that are in this story, things that are mentioned about the Rourke family and how they were, the first people to like really settle there. Over the years, they turned their millions of dollars into billions of dollars. The sort of the concept of the city was like, let's get the world's greatest prostitutes, most beautiful prostitutes from France or Germany or wherever, bring them here to this desert town, and 4 generations of beautiful mothers have beautiful daughters, and it's the family vocation, blah blah blah. So I sure hope that sees the light of day.
The Rourkes are the Kennedys. Like I think that's the reference Miller was like. If you think about the time and Miller, and then his point of view.
He's a New Englander.
Yeah. It's this Irish Catholic, powerful, dynastic family that has skeletons in its closet, and it just would have fit the time period, because like the Bushes weren't really established as a dynasty at the point that he was making this. The Clintons weren't like those are like the other like sort of like American royalty dynastic families, but it was Kennedy's, and just his and like the when he talks about how the nuns, when they would talk about St. Patrick, like they talk about him so glowingly, and that feels like a Catholic school, like the nuns talking about JFK or something, again, he didn't say like, oh, I'm going to make a story about the Kennedy, but it's like that was the reference point I think he was going for, and you see like echoes of like Chappaquiddick, and things like the sort of darker, just really exploring like the darker side of these, like royalty, or American royalty in this case. And then Sin City itself, it's like, okay, Sin City, that's Vegas or whatever, but that's like it's. That couldn't be what this is, because it's not a match, but it's an element certainly, it's a feeling you get, like, and the centrality of prostitution is definitely a connection to sins of Vegas, the real life Sin City. But then they describe it as Basin City, and L.A. is sort of geographically is sort of shaped like a bowl. It's this sort of basin shape, and L.A. seems like a much closer match. You have these sort of like Spanish missions outside of town and stuff, and just the the crime noir genre, LA is huge in that.
Yeah, and in future volumes there will be like a La Brea tar pits and junk like that.
Yeah, that mission, the Spanish mission where the final scene takes place. That's like like Vertigo has that too, like the final and Vertigo also has like a nun sort of like emerge.
Those like Spanish tile roofs, whatever you call that. Man, I tried drawing that stuff after I saw this, and it's like you have to have perfect perspective, and you can get kind of like off track, and then those tiles start to get screwed up really easy. Every time he does it, I just like chef kiss that, man. I'm like, oh, you pulled it off again, man. One of my favorite things that he draws is those roof slats, because if you get it wrong just a little bit, it knocks the whole thing off, and it doesn't look right. His always look right, and they looked right from the start, man, because this is the first one. And
you've seen that reference by other art, like that became a cliche in comics, is the portico roof or whatever, imitated by people left and right.
Let me hit the other scenes that I've flagged.
Yeah.
One of them, Ed, you mentioned earlier briefly. It's whenever Wendy, Goldie's twin sister, shows up and runs Marv over. That's a 2-page spread of just amazing directional devices and motion. It's specifically like a 3-panel sequence, bottom half of the first page and then 2 panels on the other page, of this car lining him up. There's a directional device into that next page, top panel, where she spins the car around. You mentioned that the wheels are like fire on the ground. Picture the black ground plane and the fire coming off those wheels. It could be a Ghost Rider image. It's so strong. But it's also the car spinning around. Like there's so much motion captured in a very static, what could be a very static image.
He uses lettering even to help sell the idea of the swerve, because
it's great.
It's the great scree sound effect that he used in Dark Knight Returns. But the scree kind of goes around in a circle and really helps. Like there is no mistaking like the exact direction this car is coming from and everything.
And then that bottom panel, it continues that. It's almost a loop as you're reading right up into that panel and onto the next page. Really masterful kind of stuff for movement, minimalism, 3 panels, and just this car's driving around the spread. So that's really great.
That exact sequence, it goes on for quite a while. Like he said that he worked on that all at once and didn't sleep for about a day and a half, like while putting those few pages together.
I could see it because they fit like a jigsaw puzzle. Like it's perfect. And then the other one that I cite is there's a hatchet fight that follows the basement and the farm, and it's so great because like we see that hatchet is set up early on in a foreground shot. It's stuck in a log or whatever. And when they come out, Marv has a gun. He's ready to fight these cops, and Lucille hits him on the head with a rock, takes his gun away to basically turn them in to try to like, we're going to make this right.
Smooth this out. Yeah.
And it's such a great setup. Marv comes out of being unconscious, cops are there to kill him, and all that's around is a hatchet. So we get like a 10-page fight with Marv, cops, and a hatchet as his weapon. That's good stuff, man.
Miller has referred to Sin City, specifically the Marv stuff, as like Conan the Barbarian set in the modern age. Like this is if Conan was born today, and other series in Sin City have made more direct reference to that. And in that moment, when he's got this little tiny hatchet as opposed to like the big axe that like Conan would have, but he's like, yes. and the guy's getting his head. I swear that's a Frazetta. Like I haven't found the exact moment, but I swear he's referencing like a Frazetta painting of like just
when his hands are clocked back and he's jumping. That it's so
the
dynamic.
berserker rage,
Yeah,
and decapitating a guy with this like tiny little axe.
Very strong.
And then the main bad guy, that sequence, the dude with the Uzi, he's got some wrestling makeup.
Yeah, that's a bizarre character. The leader of those cops is like a guy in a coat, another coat that he gets to steal, and face tattoo or paint or
like
something.
He's on the police, payroll. Is Gold Dust the one? Like, like that?
It's like Demolitions. It's like freaking Hawk from the Road Warriors.
It's a bizarre choice, but it works.
It's just like he's always been good with just getting these weird super visual characters, like ever since Ronin even, man, there would just be these side characters who were peripheral that would just have like some weird thing. Very often it would be like, I don't know, it would be like a weird swastika earring or just like some weird thing that makes them unforgettable.
Ed, you mentioned in that car sequence the lettering and how that becomes a directional device in Miller's composition. the lettering in this is really something that spoke to me as a kid, is like trying to figure out, at this point I wanted to be a comic book artist,
Yeah.
but there were things I didn't understand. I had no idea how to color something. Lettering wasn't something I thought about until I read this, and you realize like, oh, he's doing all of this. Like you could do all of this and make
Yeah.
something really good. And there's some great stuff, like besides just the lettering's fine, it all works, like the captioning and stuff like that. It's all fine. But he's working lettering into like composition, like sound
Yes.
effects and things. I'm looking at the back of this book, which is the great example of whenever he kills a priest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the panels are the blam, blam, blam. We've seen this in Dark Knight Returns, so it's not something that he's inventing, but he is really using the lettering as a graphic element in this story, and that's never left me. Like, it's always been like, man, use every part of the buffalo. Like, the lettering can be very expressive. It can be a storytelling. It can be directional device. It can be all these things. And Miller hits the ground running with that stuff for being like his first gig doing this whole package. Pretty good stuff from the get-go.
Well, think about Miller. He's working nonstop in comics, like, I don't know, 79 or whatever, all through the 80s and stuff. And then he goes off to Hollywood and he's got to deal with all that bullshit, writing things that never see the light of day, things that get, micromanaged and turned into garbage. And so he's had all these years for things to kind of percolate. He's away from comics. And then you come back, and all that stuff's been percolating in your subconscious, and you come back, guns blazing.
And you don't have to collaborate.
Yeah, exactly.
You
don't
have to work with anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
His brother does the logo. But just in terms of the dialogue balloons, he makes reference a lot in interviews from around this time that static rapidograph, because I don't want you to notice or linger on that stuff that much. I want you in and out of the dialogue, move forward. A nice deadline of a rapidograph is how we can do this. And this is his words. I can take a look at these boards, and because of using rapidograph, I can tell how humid it was the day that I lettered those pages, man, because that rapidograph will start to spiderweb the ink, man.
That's his line too. Whenever he's doing a line on, like, he doesn't use a line on all of these drawings, but when he uses a line, it looks like it's the same rapidograph uniform weight.
I wonder about that, man,
Yeah.
because there's some thickness to some of that stuff, man.
Yeah, I think his mature version of Sin City, like as he refines Sin City, he talks about having like the thinnest possible line and then the fattest possible like area of black ink. And like that chapter number 1 has like some stipple, which is quickly abandoned.
Yeah.
A lot of weird little ticks. So there's far more holding lines than we'll see regularly. It's very jarring. Like, I discovered Sin City when Dame to Kill For was out. So that was out for a while. And like Dame to Kill For is the first thing I got in a trade paperback form. And then when you go back to Sin City, the first one, it's like, oh, like he did have to start somewhere, and then as he goes on, he becomes more of a master of arranging shapes so that we could get black behind something that should be white, and other similar things, so that you can abandon the line.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, very often when we would see the line in here, it would be because he composed it in a way that didn't allow for some background element to make the foreground white piece pop.
Right.
That's one of Mignola's strokes. Like these guys could be in the same sort of circle of influence to try to figure that stuff out, man.
So the last note that I have, Ed,
Yes.
is this an outlaw comic?
Oh, that's a good question, man. Like, as I was reading it, like, I absolutely was like, yes, totally. Here's the thing. It's really good. Like when I think of outlaw comics, there's some sort of amateurish quality, or there's like an enthusiasm for doing the thing that sort of overshoots the professionalism of it, but this is an outlaw comic.
And Miller's totally geeking out too. Like he's totally like just indulging himself. And we're looking at this with 2019 glasses on. But at that time, there it was kind of like, what is this? The comics don't look like this. He's cutting corners.
How about this, man? It's an outlaw comic if Planet Terror and Death Proof are Grindhouse movies.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm pro that this is an outlaw comic. I had stuff prepared to argue for it, but you were on board to begin with. The knock that I see against its outlawness is visually it doesn't have the gray that we often talk about, but it has so much black ink it sort of makes up for it. You know, like that kind of obsessive inking and heavy-handedness is something that I think of with Outlaw Comics. In a way, it's here. You know, like there are these pages that are just, they must be warped and bent from how much ink is put on them. So I think that's all right. And it's extremely violent and like creatively violent.
Yeah, it's sordid, and it is like Miller's so obsessed with the comics code, and it's like he was going down the list of like, okay, let's put it, you know, there's injury to the eye, like everything except The Walking Dead. I don't know if there's any Walking Dead in this, but yeah, cannibalism, you know. So I mean, it's intended to, you know, tales to offend or whatever. It's definitely coming from that direction. It is like Psycho, like Alfred Hitchcock doing Psycho, where it's like there's this whole genre of like trash cinema, and then Hitchcock's like, I want to do one of those. So it's like somebody with chops coming in saying, I'm going to make a glorious piece of garbage, you know.
I think that's a good way to end this thing, man. Sin City, could it be the greatest Outlaw comic story ever told?
I like thinking of it as part of the Outlaw catalog, so I'm on board, and it is definitely one of my favorite Outlaw comics.
Well, without further ado, man, we're coming up on an hour, so we should get the heck out of here. Kayfabers, like, subscribe, and follow the YouTube channel if you've not done so already. Hit the bell icon. We will let you know whenever we have new videos available. Tom, give them a plug real quick.
Follow me at Tom Scholey on Twitter, and buy Fantastic Four Grand Design coming soon.
Or maybe out.
Or maybe, yeah, there now, yeah.
You can find Cartoonist Kayfabe merch at our spread shop. There's a link below the video to that.
I think we should go off and make our own glorious pieces of garbage. Jimmy, go give them the marching orders.
Read more comics.